Great. It looks like we've started. Do we have some folks coming in?
Yes, we're
Great.
up to 25 at the moment.
Welcome. We'll start
Yeah,
in a couple of minutes.
I'll do my introduction and then housekeeping, and then I'll let you guys take it away.
Perfect.
I am Jean going to do the intro shortly, just giving everyone a moment to join the webinar. I can tell you've attended a few of our webinars. Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Kushner, and I'm on the business development team here at TPGi. I'm going to give it another minute or so, so just hold tight, and we'll start right on the hour with a few housekeeping items. I try to be quite punctual, actually. People are busy, have busy days. So here we go. Thank you everyone for joining us today. The webinar will be breaking down EN 301549, the European Standard for Digital Accessibility, with David Swallow and Mitchell Evan. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording after the event. It sometimes takes a day. We have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. We'll have time for live Q&A, so please use the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Sometimes we miss questions. If we run out of time, we'll be sure to document those and get them to you. Also, if you put questions in the chat, they might get missed, so please try to use the Q&A. Lastly, I'd also like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, usability testing, I will send out an email with a link to schedule time to speak with one of our experts after the webinar. And with that, I will let David and Mitchell introduce themselves and get started.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. I'm David Swallow, Principal UX Consultant at TPGi. I live and work in York in the UK, which is sadly not in the EU anymore. My work focuses on digital accessibility, and I'm actively involved with the W3C's Cognitive and Learning Disabilities Accessibility Task Force, or COGA. And I also represent COGA in various W3C standards groups and contributing to the development of WCAG 3.
Hi, thanks, David. Hi, I'm Mitchell. I'm a principal accessibility engineer at TPGi. I have had my accessibility career located in the US and moved to Berlin 5 years ago. And I am on the W3C WCAG to ICT task force, where we help show how WCAG can apply to non-web technology.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you for attending. With all the focus on the EAA, the European Accessibility Act deadline, you've probably heard a lot about EN 301-549. But what exactly is it and why is it so important? So EN 301-549 is the European standard for ICT accessibility, shaping how digital products and services are designed, developed, and procured across the EU. So whether you work in UX or development or procurement or policy, understanding this standard is crucial, especially as its role expands with the EAA. So in this session, we're going to break down what EN 301-549 is, how it compares to other standards, where it goes beyond WCAG, and what to expect as it evolves. So let's start with the basics. So yeah, EN 301-549 is the European standard for accessibility in information and communication technology, ICT. This means it doesn't just cover websites and mobile apps, it also applies to hardware, self-service kiosks, electronic documents, and even technology like biometrics and real-time communication. Now, how did it come about? Back in the early 2010s, accessibility requirements across Europe were all over the place. Some countries had their own rules, others relied on WCAG, and there was no unified approach. So the European Commission saw the need for consistency. So they issued Mandate 376, asking European standards organizations to create a common standard for ICT accessibility. So the outcome of this was EN 301-549, first published in 2014. And it provided a clear, harmonized set of accessibility requirements for public sector organizations procuring ICT, businesses and developers building accessible products, and EU legislation needing a reference point. And since then, EN 301-549 has been updated several times to keep pace with evolving technology and legislation. And the current version, which is 3.2.1, published in 2021, aligns with the Web Accessibility Directive, providing a clear standard for digital accessibility in the EU. So with the European Accessibility Act deadline approaching, EN 301-549 is set to play an even greater role in shaping accessibility requirements across Europe.
The current version of EN is not just a voluntary guideline, it's legally backed. It's the foundation for the EU Web Accessibility Directive, which mandates accessibility for public sector websites and apps in Europe. And from 2025, the European Accessibility Act will extend requirements to many private sector services. Since we're talking about laws and standards here, I want to mention that nothing we're saying today is legal advice, just general information. So EN 301549 isn't just another standard, it's a major driver of accessibility across Europe.
Okay, so now we've covered what EN 301549 is, why it matters. We're going to look at how it compares to other accessibility standards. So later we'll talk about what's coming next with the European Accessibility Act. First, let's see how EN 301549 aligns with WCAG in section 508.
And the theme here is going to be adding and building on what's been done before. This is showing a diagram of how the standard, these particular major standards relate to each other. And it's a high level view. It's not getting to the granular level of some individual differences and criteria, but at a high level. We're starting with WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which, as many people know, has gone through revisions from 2.0 to 2.1 to 2.2 now. And each edition is additive. So everything that's in WCAG 2.0 is also in 2.1 plus new things. Section 508, going backwards in time a little bit back to 2017, was based on WCAG 2.0 and has not been updated. That's the US federal accessibility standard. EN 301549, our main subject today, started at a similar time, but it's since been updated. We're at version 3 now, 3.2.1 of the EN. So it now, as of now, the published version includes WCAG 2.1, so it's a little bit refreshed. And the diagram shows an overlap between section 508 and EN, which is actually a substantial overlap. It really addresses a lot of criteria for hardware and software. David, I'm gonna throw this over to you here and to talk about some more about the relationship between these standards.
Thanks, Richard. So we've established that EN 301549, WCAG, and section 508 all play a role in accessibility standards, but how does WCAG fit into EN 301549 specifically? Well, rather than replacing WCAG, EN 301549 builds on it. So WCAG serves as a foundation for accessibility requirements related to websites and web applications, mobile apps, and web content, including electronic documents presented online. And as Mitchell mentioned, the current version of EN 301549, version 3.2.1, explicitly references WCAG 2.1 level AA as the required standard for digital content. So if an organization must comply with EN 301549, they also need to meet WCAG 2.1 AA for digital content. Now, you might be wondering why EN 301549 still references WCAG 2.1 when WCAG 2.2 was published in 2023. And the answer is simple. Standards take time to update. So EN 301549 is revised periodically, and future versions will definitely incorporate WCAG 2.2, but more on that later. So for now, organizations looking to stay ahead can proactively adopt WCAG 2.2, but it's not yet a formal requirement under EN 301549. Just want to advance, Mitchell. So what are the key similarities and differences between EN 301549 and WCAG? Is EN 301549 just WCAG with a different label? No, not quite. So here are some of the key differences and similarities. So one similarity is that WCAG and the EN 301549 are both accessibility standards. So WCAG, developed by the W3C, serves as a technical recommendation for web accessibility. It's an international standard with ISO status. but that alone doesn't make it legally binding. It only becomes enforceable when referenced in legislation. Similarly, EN 301549 is a formal European standard. And again, while not legally binding on its own, it is referenced in legislation such as the EU Web Accessibility Directive and maybe soon the EAA, which mandates compliance. So this means that in the EU, WCAG 2.1 level AA is effectively required, not because WCAG itself is law, but because EN 301549 incorporates WCAG and is cited in legislation. One difference is that EN 301549 covers more than just web content and apps. WCAG had its origins focusing on web-based content, whereas EN 301549 applies to a much broader range of ICT, including software, hardware, biometrics, and telecommunications. And we'll discuss these additional requirements in the next section. Another difference is that WCAG uses a pass-fail model, while EN 301549 emphasizes functional performance. So WCAG success criteria are binary. They're either met or not met. And this makes them useful for testing, but doesn't always capture real-world usability. EN 301549 includes functional performance statements that describe the intended accessibility outcomes for people with disabilities. Now, these statements are non-normative, they're not strict requirements, but they help ensure accessibility is measured not just by technical compliance, but also by whether a product is actually usable. And the EAA goes on to build on this approach, requiring that products and services be accessible in practice, reinforcing the idea that accessibility is about real-world usability and not just meeting technical checkboxes. So what should organizations do? For most organizations, the message is clear. If you meet WCAG 2.1 AA, you're well on your way to meeting EN 301549's digital content requirements. To stay ahead, proactively adopting WCAG 2.2 will help future-proof compliance. But since EN 301549 goes beyond WCAG in many areas, organizations need to consider more than just WCAG when assessing ICT accessibility. So in short, EN 301549 builds on WCAG rather than replacing it. It uses WCAG as a foundation for web content and software and documents, but it's not the only standard that matters.
Yes, turning attention back to the United States for a moment, we'll look at Section 508 for comparison. And the story is similar. So there's a lot of parallels between Section 508 and the EN. Like the EN, Section 508 includes WCAG, but as mentioned, only WCAG version 2.0 at this point. Also like the European, the EN 301549 creates a legal requirement at the moment and for the moment for the European public sector. Section 508 also carries a direct legal requirement for the US public sector. And thirdly, comparing both the US and the European standards, they cover hardware and software in addition to ways that are not directly and as completely covered in WCAG by itself.
Okay, so we've seen how EN 301549 incorporates WCAG, but EN 301549 isn't just a repackaging of WCAG. It extends beyond it in important ways, cover a wider range of IC, including areas that WCAG doesn't address. So in this next section, we're going to explore a selection of these additional requirements and how they help ensure accessibility across different types of technology.
And I'll mention here that I hope that I got the link finally correct, but I posted a link to where if you haven't seen the whole standard before EN 301549, there's a link where it's publicly available in the chat. And the first example we'll talk about is called user preferences. It's clause 11.7 of the EN 301549. And what is this about? User preferences means system settings for accessibility. And the ones that are particularly important are system settings for color, contrast, and text size. And so this is specifically pointed to software, including mobile apps. Mobile apps are software. Why is this important for users? Because it deals mainly with color, contrast, and text size. The benefits are significant for users with low vision who may need to see their colors differently, may need increased contrast, even beyond what WCAG requires, and can adjust text size. And how does this compare with WCAG? Well, text size is quite similar. The only difference is kind of an edge case where WCAG would allow a web page or app to have its own widget for text sizing. This says, it needs to already work based on a setting, like a system-wide setting that a user may already have. So it's just slightly more stringent. For color and contrast, though, these are plus requirements that, WCAG has a contrast requirement without adjustment. And this says that, for example, if the system has an additional further increased contrast, that apps must also honor that.
Okay, so EN 301.549 includes specific requirements for biometric authentication and interaction, ensuring that users who can't provide a particular biometric characteristic have an alternative way to authenticate. So biometric authentication, like things like fingerprint scans, facial recognition, and voice verification, is increasingly used for security and convenience in devices and systems. But these methods can exclude people with disabilities, including people with prosthetic limbs or limb differences, which means that they might not have fingerprints, blind or low vision users who may struggle with facial or retina recognition, people with speech disabilities who can't use voice recognition, and people with neurological conditions that affect biometric patterns like tremors interfering with fingerprint scans. So by requiring an alternative authentication method, such as PIN codes, passwords, physical security keys, EN 301.549 ensures biometric security systems do not create barriers. That's how it goes beyond WCAG. Well, WCAG 2.1 doesn't address authentication methods. WCAG 2.2 introduced accessible authentication, which focuses on reducing cognitive load for password entry. And biometrics is mentioned there as one possible alternative to cognitive tests. EN 301.549 in clause 5.3 goes further by requiring an alternative authentication method for any biometric verification. And this alternative can either be another biometric characteristic, so say fingerprint and facial recognition, or a non-biometric method, ensuring that users who can't provide a specific biometric characteristic still have a way to authenticate securely.
Yeah, and this is a good example, and I see this a couple of examples here where not every website and every app has biometrics. So while it applies to any kind of software, website, even potentially hardware, it only applies where there are biometrics. And then similarly, our next example talks about a product documentation or documentation of a website or documentation of a mobile app, that sort of thing. Now, some websites, just have, they don't have a help section and that sort of thing. But if they do, then this would apply. And compared with WCAG, for starters, part of it is the same as WCAG. It just says that such documentation needs to be accessible, meeting the same WCAG requirements as any other content, but it goes beyond in a significant way, which says the content of the documentation needs to explain the accessibility features of the website or app. And why is this important? it can range from a nice help to absolutely crucial. If a website just uses typical compatibility features like keyboard and assistive technology, that can be a reassurance to users, especially people who are less technical, to know what to expect. And it becomes really critical when the service uses something less common or even unique, like custom keystrokes, where the user could not otherwise know how to use it. So this information is potentially relevant to users with any kind of disability to know how to use the service.
So EN 301549 in clause 6 includes accessibility requirements for real-time voice communication systems such as telephony, voice over IP, and video conferencing. So real-time communication is increasingly essential for work, education, and social interaction. But without accessibility features, these platforms can exclude people with disabilities, such as deaf and hard of hearing users who rely on captions and sign language interpretation, or text-based alternatives like RTT, real-time text. Users with speech disabilities who need text-based communication methods to participate in conversations, and people with mobility impairments who require hands-free operation or alternative input methods. So how does it go beyond WCAG? WCAG obviously focuses on web content accessibility, but it doesn't include specific requirements for real-time communication systems. So whereas EN 301509 requires that real-time voice communication platforms support captioning and sign language interpretation and alternative text-based methods, ensuring that they are accessible to a wider range of users.
And continuing the theme of wide applicability, to all types of technology, but certain features of that technology, we're going to look at authoring tools. Now, the phrase authoring tool means what you think it means. You may think of content management system. You may think of a document editor, like an Office suite, and that is correct. And it can be web-based or app-based, and those are certainly correct and very important. The meaning of authoring tool is a little bit more in this context of EN 301549. It means any function where a user creates content for other users. So it includes the ones we mentioned. It can also include, for example, a common one is a rich text editor. That is one function of a more complex web application, and it happens to be a way that one user posts a message which other users internally or in the public can read, and that would also meet the definition of an authoring tool. And why does this matter? Well, it matters as much as the reach of the content. So, just a handful of creators could publish dozens or millions of web pages, social media posts, PDF, other documents, any format, and reach dozens of people or thousands or millions of people. So the importance can scale up really large very quickly. And the benefits for users with disabilities are equally varied. They can be quite narrow. If, for example, your content creation just creates video, then you're looking at just the video requirements, or any other kind. If you can create, web pages that have all kinds of content in it, and practically everything in WCAG can apply to that, and all of the user benefits along with this. You think about this, one of the ways that authoring tool requirements are especially important is for procurement. If you're an organization, a company that is selecting a tool to use for purchase, even free tools, choose the tool carefully and use it correctly, and really ask the questions. Does this meet an authoring tool requirement? Because you're going to have to live with the content that you create. So how does this compare to WCAG? Well, in a way, it's the same as WCAG, but in the sense that content created by that tool needs to be able to meet WCAG criteria. But it's a little more specific than that. It says that the authoring tool must guide content creators. The word is guide in EN 301549. Guide content creators to create accessible content that specifically that meets WCAG criteria. Using the video example I mentioned, it would need to prompt users to provide captions and audio description. If it didn't do that, then users might not realize they need to. It's not enough to just be possible to do it. It needs to guide them to do it. And note that who experiences this is all content creators, not just people with disabilities. So there's more than one user in this scenario, the content creator and the person, the potentially very many people who use that content.
Okay, so self-service devices are everywhere. ATMs, ticket machines, parcel lockers, hotel check-in kiosks, self-checkouts, and many more. EN 301549 includes accessibility requirements for self-service terminals and kiosks, primarily in the sections on closed functionality, which is clause 5.1, and hardware, clause 8. Ensuring that these devices are designed to accommodate diverse user needs. So as self-service kiosks become more common, inaccessibility creates significant barriers. Kiosks offer convenience, but many operate as closed systems, meaning users can't install assistive technology or adjust settings to meet their needs. And this obviously poses a major accessibility challenge. Many people rely on screen readers and magnification or alternative input methods that may not be supported by these devices. If the kiosk interface isn't accessible, the kiosk becomes unusable. So some key issues include blind and low vision users may be unable to interact if there's no speech output or tactile navigation. Wheelchair users may struggle if controls and screens are mounted too high, and people with dexterity impairments may find kiosks unusable if touchscreens require precise gestures or force. How does it go beyond WCAG? Well, again, WCAG focuses on digital content and doesn't address physical self-service kiosks. EN 301549 fills this gap by requiring accessibility features such as speech output for users who can't see the screen, tactile controls or alternatives to touchscreen only operation, height adjustable interfaces or multiple input positions for wheelchair users, and alternative input methods for users who can't operate standard controls. So by addressing both software and hardware, EN 301549 ensures self-service terminals and kiosks are usable by more people, something that WCAG alone doesn't cover. Okay, so far we've covered just some of the ways that EN 301549 goes beyond WCAG, and there are around I think it's around 60 additional requirements that go beyond WCAG, reflecting the standard's broad focus on ensuring accessibility across all types of ICT, not just web content. But accessibility standards continue to evolve, and with the European Accessibility Act deadline approaching, EN 301549 is being updated now to align with new legal and technological requirements. So Mitchell's now going to take us through what's next and how the standard is set to develop under the EAA. Mitchell, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm taking us to the slide that we had before and building on that, continuing the theme of building. So WCAG builds on WCAG, and Section 508 build on WCAG and each other. What's next is the European Accessibility Act. It looks something like this. as mentioned, it's a European Union law or directive is technically what it is, and not a technical standard. However, it within this directive itself has specific technical requirements, so it has a similar practical effect to a standard. What's going to happen with this, or what is happening right now? So one thing is that currently published version 3.2.1 of the EN is being updated right now. It's stable, nearing completion, and we'll post a link to a draft of what's what's current, its current up to the minute status. As shown here, EAA is definitely including WCAG 2.2, so that's an update. The functional performance, the usability measures become a normative requirement in some cases. There's some refreshing of the hardware and two-way voice communication requirements to, as David well said, to stay updated with technology. A couple of interesting new requirements that are also going to be in the EN, the next version of the EN, version 4, are analogous to the product documentation, where it describes the accessibility of the website or app itself, but specifically e-commerce. The online catalog needs to describe the accessibility features of what they sell. That's a new requirement. Another one, similar, is that video program guides must list the accessibility features of videos, so people who need captions or people who need audio description can find those videos that have it. Really building on what we've seen. And last but not least, there's a blank here that's not just EN 301-549, but the European standards organizations are in the process in parallel of adding separate standards that are not in EN 301-549, and in the ones that primarily concern digital products are ironically the non-digital new non-digital standard relates to products because it covers things like printed product manuals for phones and televisions, that sort of thing. On the theme of communication, the European emergency number 112 has communication access requirements. E-books have specific requirements such as metadata. We're still finding out how they're going to specify the standard from that, potentially just linking to the W3C's EPUB standard. And so there's a lot to come here, and it's in progress right now. There are some open questions about some of these updates, like what are the details going to be? And you might say, well, it's kind of late for that, isn't it? Because the EAA deadline for conformance is this June, and we're still waiting to see these details. Yes, it feels late. I think it feels late. I think a lot of people would agree to that. So how do we deal with that? The official answer is that, because I mentioned that EAA includes quite a bit of detail about what its requirements are, one could, and this is the official way to do it, just use the EAA directly. Don't reference any standards, and just figure out whether this product or service, meets those, those provisions. It's Annex 1 of the EAA that says what accessibility means under this directive. What we've been doing at TPGi is taking sort of a half and half approach. Those provisions of the EAA that that look like they match closely to the already published European standard EN 301-549, we would say that use existing EN 301-549. As David rightly said earlier, a very solid foundation is just, with a lot of what we do is is really just WCAG. These other criteria are super important in some cases, but WCAG remains the foundation. So, you know, while there's some uncertainty still, there's a whole lot that's not at all uncertain. You know, meeting WCAG as the foundation is super important. And if we haven't already, we're going to post in the chat, as mentioned, a link to the not only the current draft of the next EN, which I've contributed to a little bit through the issue tracker. We'll also link to that issue tracker. You can see the bleeding edge of what's happening with EN right now.
Okay, and also like to add that we at TPGi are running a quick EAA preparedness survey to understand where businesses stand, their challenges, and how they plan for compliance. So your insights here would help shape the support and resources needed to make accessibility a priority and not a last-minute scramble. So we'd be very grateful if you took our 5-minute survey and see how your organization compares. And we'll send you an advanced copy of our findings if you provide your email. And there's a link in the chat there. Okay, so that wraps up our presentation. And now we'll take a look at some of your questions. And we've had quite a few in. So I will just dive in. Thank you for using the Q&A feature. That makes it much easier. So question from Syed. Does EN 301-549 address accessibility for QR codes even? I could take that one. Well, no, EN 301-549 doesn't explicitly mention QR codes, no, and neither does the EAA. However, as they are images, accessibility requirements still apply. You know, the QR codes need to be large enough and have sufficient contrast and be accompanied by text descriptions for screen readers, just allowing people with visual impairments to understand them and to use them. There are sort of various, I don't know, you might call user experience recommendations around QR codes, you know, in terms of things like placement and size, maybe tactile indicators, the overall visual design of them. I can share some of those resources. I'll have a look for those. But no, not explicitly mentioned in these standards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great question. Great answer. I'll take the next one. Does
Sure.
EN 301-549 regulate self-service checkouts in the grocery store? Does the grocery store self-service checkout with touchscreen, weight scale, payment and scanner fall under the EAA? If yes, then which product class would it be under? This is a type of a very common question that says, so we did, for a preface for those who don't know the EAA as much, in addition to the accessibility requirements, it scopes itself to particular sectors of consumer services and products. So on the services side, if I miss one, please forgive me, but it covers e-commerce, streaming services like video, consumer banking, including credit. I know I'm going to blank on a couple of them, ebooks, communication services. I'm sure I missed one. So the question is a grocery store one of those? So I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. A grocery store does not sound to me like it's one of those particularly regulated services, but that's more of a legal compliance question, and one that we're just starting to hear that individual countries in Europe are getting spun up with their public agencies that are going to be monitoring and enforcing the EAA in each country. And so my take on this personally is that it's not a directly covered service, but especially when you get other questions like this that are right on the line, like, wait, this could go either way. Really, the advice is to contact individual country enforcement agencies.
Good answer, Mitchell. And do you want to take the next one? Quite similar kind of ground.
Yeah, it does kind of. Go ahead. You want to read it? I'll take it.
What are the requirements specifically related to e-commerce in EAA? Also, if you are not selling products and providing self-support services to customers, does it apply?
Okay. So the first question is, what are the requirements? I mentioned one in terms of the e-commerce that the website or app provide information about the accessibility of the items that it sells. Beyond that, there are a couple of specific clauses or provisions of the EAA Annex 1 that mention e-commerce, but in my reading of them, they don't go beyond the current WCAG and EN 301-549. So that's the answer to that part of it. If you're not selling products and providing self-support services to customers, does it apply? I think the question is getting at, and feel free to post a follow-up if this is not it. Like, could it be e-commerce if you're not selling something? This is feeling more like a kind of thing that might need to go to one of the enforcement authorities. In case there's something we're missing here. I know entering a contract that doesn't currently exchange money but commits you to buying something, I know that's considered e-commerce. So there could be, the answer I would say is probably not, but maybe could be. Sounds like a legal question. Great question. So this is the question to end all questions. Could you advise on a knowledge hub in EU on ICT accessibility obligations?
There is one, isn't there's I remember, is it like knowledge? Is it something knowledge hub actually called something like that? It was mentioned at the one of the EAA summits. I am subscribed.
I'm going to offer TPGi's own website on the
EAA,
on the European Accessibility Act. We have a hub of our own. And as you've heard in this presentation today, there's EAA and there's EN 301-549, and they are joined at the hip. And so, if you don't see within tpgi.com what you're looking for, use the search or ask us questions. Those that we don't get to today, we're always happy to receive questions. As far as I would say that in a I find kind of introductory, but the European Commission has put up a website talking about accessibility in general. I don't find that it gets to the details of what's specific about Europe. It just talks about, a lot of good global best practices, like how to design inclusively and how to have accessibility be part of your program. Certainly, it's a very good resource, but it's not particularly new at this point. Perhaps we'll see that change in the future. I want to, is there a way to mark this for further follow-up?
Yeah, I was wondering the same actually. Yeah, sorry, I've got some notes.
Okay, great.
I was just going to say another.
I also have all of the questions recorded.
Okay,
perfect. was going to
Great.
say another great source of information is the European Disability Forum,
Oh,
who
yes.
we've partnered with previously, TPGi, I mean. And they've got, I think, an EAA toolkit with lots of resources around that. I have got the URL for that one, so I'll drop that in the chat.
I'm going to look ahead here and see if we can group a couple of these. Actually, the next 3 or 4 all are concerning specific clauses. I'm going to take the two. I'm going to take the 2 ones about the EN first. The next one says, based on clause 8.4.2.2, that's in the EN, it states, where a control requires a force greater than 22.2 newtons to operate it, an accessible alternative means of operation that requires less force shall be provided. How can this force be measured? Yeah, there are, I'll say that I have done this before. I don't know all about the tools, but they're called force meters. So there are tools that are designed for this. They cost a bit of money. I think a good one costs a couple of €100. And they can attach. They can just press a thing. They can grip a thing and pull it and then it's like a small scale, handheld like scale, not unlike a luggage scale in a way that works in push and pull. That's a good. Anything if you want to add, please jump in. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you don't have one of those, it's not ideal, but sometimes manufacturers include that kind of information in their specifications. If you sort of dig down into that, they'll have the force required, so you can go by that.
Yeah.
But ideally, you'd measure it yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I'm gonna expand on that just a little bit. To talk just a moment. We didn't talk at all about VPAC today, or documentation of accessibility. And so, if you're building a kiosk or you're integrating web widgets into a website, or just for a couple of examples, it's great to ask the component vendors to say, how are you doing on accessibility? Ideally before you've chosen them. And whatever they provide, whether it's a VPAT, a voluntary product accessibility template, or any other format of answer to that question, how are you doing on accessibility? I mean, read it critically. So, getting back to the force measurement, you can. I think it's especially if you're trying to do a million things, you can't do them all yourself. Do ask for other people's documentation. Trust but verify. Whatever that looks like in your organization. Let's see. We have. I'm going to continue on the specific EN clauses question. This is from Steve. Do you consider that clauses 11.0 to 11.8 all apply to websites? So these clauses are called software. Do they all apply to websites in terms of both EN 301.549 and Web Accessibility Directive conformance? Again, that's that's current generation of public sector regulation in Europe. And there's a link, digital strategy. I say, so this particular website, I guess we can share this back to the chat. This particular resource from the European Commission only includes clauses 11.7 and 11.8. Also, the introduction to clause 11 does not mention whether it applies to websites, although I think it should. Okay, 11.8 is authoring tools. Definitely applies to website. There's no question at all. 11.7 is user preferences. I think I'll try to make a brief answer. There's been debate. There's been inconsistency. Germany's de facto internal norm for the EN up till now, or like testing methodology, for example, has said that in a limited way, 11.7 user preferences can apply to web pages. Jumping ahead, the next EN should clarify this. I think that's the quick version I can offer.
Just jumping back into the chat there, James, going back to QR codes again, sorry. James says, wouldn't they be covered by functional performance criteria, which requires vision to hold the scanner in the right place? Yeah, I suppose that's a good example of something where it isn't covered by a specific requirement in the standards, but is caught by functional criteria, functional performance criteria. It could be usage without vision, like you say, because you require vision to locate and scan the QR codes, or usage with limited vision, or even usage with limited manipulation or strength, as they put it. If scanning the QR code requires precise hand movement, it might cause barriers for users with motor disabilities. So yeah, so the EAA and 31549 don't mention QR codes, but yeah, it would be caught by the functional performance criteria. So yeah, good catch.
Yeah, good points all around. And I'll add one other aspect to that. I very briefly mentioned that the EA makes functional performance normative in certain cases, and this is the kind of case for that where it's not where there's an interaction or an aspect of the service provision that is not addressed in the technical requirements. Then you must use the new functional performance criteria for the EAA there. That's in the ways that David described. I think I'm going to take one more. I'm going to take a few more questions. One more that is specific to. No, I think we covered that one already. I'm just going to go in time order here from the top. Is EAA applicable to customer service representatives / technical support agents? Yes, we didn't mention that, but both the existing EN 301549 has it's in clause 12.2, I want to say 12 point something, talks about communication for support services, and the EAA has a mirror, actually more than one point in it that mirrors that requirement and reiterates that it's required for the EAA. So that's a strict yes.
How about
yeah, you want to take
another question from anonymous attendee. Since the current version of EN 31549 is not harmonized, does it still give you presumption of conformity for the EAA directive? I guess not at this precise moment, but once the revised version of EN 31549 is approved by the European Commission, then it will provide that presumption of conformance to the EAA. So this will mean that products and services that meet the EN 31549 will be assumed to comply with the EAA unless proven otherwise. I think that's the case as we stand, isn't it?
Yeah, and this might be in reference to something I said, that TPGi has been using the existing EN as one of our measures of the EAA, even though it's not pointed to. That is completely correct. The state that we're in right now for the EAA is you could use any testing methodology you wish if it's credible that testing measures things in the EAA. And so rather than make one up from nothing, why not use, because as we've seen, everything is definitely additive and building on. Why not use the things that have been established? But does it confer there's actually at the moment nothing special about using the existing EN for the EAA. That won't happen for another several months.
Okay. We're getting quite close to time now.
Yeah.
And some of these look quite meaty questions that are remaining.
We'll
as I
get
said-
questions. Go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to reassure everybody, whatever we don't get to, we can have David and Mitchell answer the questions after, and when we send out the recording, we'll send out the answers.
Absolutely.
Great. Here's another, usually I avoid these scope questions. No, okay, I'm just going to wade into this one. Are insurance companies obliged to comply with the EAA, at least only for the e-commerce part of their services? Great, very thoughtful question. The second part first, if it's e-commerce, it's e-commerce. So that sounds like a yes. There's a rather complicated definition of, so the EAA says consumer banking, but they have a very, like two cross references deep. There's a very detailed listing of what's meant by consumer banking. I think the answer might be some kinds of insurance, but not all kinds. So that's an attempt at that answer. I think we're going to take one more here. David, do you have a favorite? Oh, I see two that we should take. The self-service kiosk one, that's a favorite of ours. How about that? We can talk about that. Self-service kiosks are all types, ticketing, check-in / restaurants in scope, or are some types not covered by the EAA? David, this has been a favorite of ours. It's public knowledge. We've done work for McDonald's to help make their kiosk accessible. And so, this question and others, that's just one, that's one that we can talk about publicly. David, do you want to comment on this? I have a couple.
Yeah, I was going to look up the what the defined scope is for self-service terminals. So in the EAA text, it says the following self-service terminals: payment terminals, automated teller machines, ticketing machines, check-in machines, and then interactive self-service terminals providing information, but excluding terminals installed as integrated parts of vehicles, aircraft, ships, or rolling stock. So it's an oddly precise collection of terminals. But yes, in the well, the ones you mentioned at least would typically be covered. But yeah, like Mitchell says, we've looked at kiosks in restaurants, payment terminals, the handheld things you might get at a restaurant. And yeah, that they are all in scope. But yeah, there's some specific ones that are excluded, but less common, I'd say.
Yeah. A payment function is an important factor because payment terminals are just universally included in EAA payment things that allow self-service payment. So that's going to pick up things in restaurants, even though restaurants aren't one of the sectors. They're not financial services, but they have a payment feature built in. I will say that that's what the EAA requires. One can always choose to make things accessible and choose a good standard like the EN 301549 or even the US 508. These are good choices if you say, I want to provide good service to my customers. How should I test for that? you know, there's nothing that says don't test for these as well. And so that can be a motivator, you know.
I think that's a good
we're
point to
minute-
end on.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. We're a minute over our time. Stephanie, any last words?
Not really. I put in the chat for everyone because I thought we were getting right to overtime. If anyone needs any support, please reach out to us. Thanks for joining today. I've put the meeting link if you want to schedule a meeting or our email address in the chat. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.